Holy Father, keep those you have given me true to your name, so that they may be one like us. This high priestly prayer of the Lord concerns us all. We can go through the whole of our existence creating wedges, splits, divisions, factions, disagreement and arguments in general, or we can go serenely through life, learning the art of letting things pass. I have noticed that some people have a special gift of being positive and seeing the positive in every element, especially when it comes to religious dialogue. Pope Benedict actually was good at this, very open-minded, kind and gentle, but knowing all the elements of an equation and therefore all the redeeming factors, and yet clear. One without the other can actually be counterproductive, adding to the reason for argument. We are in a continuum. The Church cannot deny itself. It is important to be a son of the Church and therefore a listener. We can't change the Lord's words. The Church is subservient to its Master. And therefore one cannot today say that yesterday the Lord didn't quite get it right. This holds true with regard to what perhaps we were not told 101 years ago. It is now 1 year since the centenary of the first apparition at Fatima. It is the vigil of the 13th of May. And although we were not to be told what was given in the eventual secrets until 1960, it was the desire of heaven that we be told all in that year. One can deduce from the way in which St. John Paul II and also Pope Benedict went into great explicit insistence on reading certain chapters of the Apocalypse when they were at Fatima, that they were actually giving indirectly what it had been judged prudent not to disclose directly. The words that were not to be given to mankind, as the press release announced in 1960. On the 9th of February of that year, it was made known that the words were not going to be made known. Therefore there were words, and there are references from precisely the Vatican sources themselves, that these were words that they had heard. Actually, it was 2 of the 3 that had heard them. Lucia, her cousin, little Jacinta. But only through them, Francisco, because he did not hear them, but they were allowed to tell them to him. therefore there were words. And whereas Our Lady did explain herself what they were being shown with regard to hell, which was one of the parts of this secret, that is to say the second part, the third part would have needed more of a commentary. And when we were given, it would appear, the secret in the year 2000, in June, we were, it would seem, not given the necessary commentary, for it was far more necessary in that case than in the case of the vision of hell. The historic part regarding a worse war is now gone, but we were given to understand that the third secret, this vision, also concerned the past, the assassination of John Paul II. It does not correspond. He survived miraculously through our Blessed Lady. And it was after this assassination attempt that he asked to be given the third secret. But actually we know that what he meant was the part of it that was in the Holy Office archives. We know now that already in 1978 he had wanted to know where the third secret was, and he had read it immediately, as early as 1978. That we know. All one has to do is listen, for instance, to the detailed research given on YouTube by Chris Ferrara to see that actually the evidence now is massive, that actually the words were there in another envelope in the Vatican apartment itself. We know that they were there from Paris Match, which was allowed to photograph that apartment in 1957. And Sister Pasqualina, the private housekeeper of Pius XII, who had followed him from Munich, where he had been nuncio, answered the question of the photographer with regard to that particular bit of furniture. And she had said that in there was the third secret of Fatima. We know also that it had been read by some. Archbishop Capovilla is a witness on this one, and that after being read it had been resealed with the names of those who had read it on the envelope. It is still there, and we know from the testimony of the Bishop of Lisbon that it contained one sheet of approximately 20 to 25 lines that could be seen by holding it up to the light. Whereas the vision part is 4 pages long and runs to 62 lines. We also know that when St. John the 23rd did open it, he was able to understand one part of it from the Portuguese that he had, but the other was in more difficult Portuguese for him, and he had to have it translated, so we deduced that would have been precisely the words. And we also know of the difficulty that Sister Lucia had in writing it down, whereas she was able perfectly well to write all the rest. But this part was so terrifying that it was only with a special grace that eventually she was able to write it. in obedience. And it was to be kept secret until 1960. We know from what Cardinal Ratzinger said in an interview to Jesus magazine in 1984 that it does concern grave things. And we know from what he said to the Filipino ambassador, Howard D., that the message of Fatima and that of Akita are the same. And therefore we know from Akita that it does contain terrible things regarding the future, but also regarding the faith. And therefore, when we see that Pius XII in 1955 sent Father Schweigel, a Jesuit, to make a personal interview with Sister Lucia, and when he came back and said that logically he cannot disclose its content, he was able to say that it was in two parts. That one concerned the Pope, the other concerned the faith of the Church, crisis to come. This then would be the follow-up to what Sister Lucia herself put in the fourth memoir. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Therefore, it will not be the case in other places. So we have to do here with the faith and its consequences with regard to the Christian soul and of the world itself. There's going to be, it would seem, lack of the unity for which Christ prayed, collapse indeed. And eventually, when things are so bad, it can only be through allowing a major disaster to bring people back to their wits, that the rebuilding can actually happen. This high priestly prayer of the Lord would have been therefore uttered with knowledge of the future of mankind and of what the Church the Lord himself was founding before he ascended to heaven was going to face. How demonic powers would be trying to attack it, and yet it would be his with the divine promise. And therefore we see how in the end the promise that was allowed to be made known, that in the end the Immaculate Heart would triumph, Russia would be consecrated, and that there would be the conversion of Russia and a period of peace to the world. But we can see, by looking at actually what has happened, that although the consecration John Paul II did on the 25th of March 1984 of the world to the Immaculate Heart, that war at that point was averted, because we know that it did have an effect. Something went hugely wrong on the 13th of May of that year, therefore 6 weeks afterwards, in the great convoy of nuclear missiles being transported to a very dangerous part of the world, where it would seem that Russia was going to make a break in the umbrella of protection from America so as to do something in Europe. That went all completely wrong on the 13th of May, therefore that was something that we can link with that consecration. But the specific element of Russia, it would seem, was not sufficiently explicitly made. And therefore we are still, let's face it, awaiting the fulfillment of that promise. We have a clue of what the project of heaven was and what would have been the result from actually what happened in 1931 in Portugal, when the Cardinal Archbishop of Lisbon and all the bishops of Portugal made an explicit consecration of Portugal to the Immaculate Heart. Something huge happened on every level of the society and of the country. massive protection from communism, involvement with the Spanish Civil War, involvement with the Second World War, and a massive resurgence of Catholicism with a huge number of vocations. And it was called the miracle, il milagro. And therefore, that's a hint of what heaven was promising if explicitly Russia was consecrated to the Immaculate Heart, that heaven had a precise project. It was clear, explicit, and it was to show that it was directly due to the intervention of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is essential to the understanding of Fatima. The devotion to the Immaculate Heart was to be placed aside, alongside that of the Sacred Heart, and they were to be seen, to be working together. It is therefore the calm working out of Paris le Mondial and earlier, the two hearts side by side and inseparable. This then is the heart of our God, the heart that beats at the Last Supper, that was heard by St. John, the beloved disciple, in a serene mode of listening and intimacy. Peace is heaven's language, and Our Lady came to bring peace. We have to be, therefore, beings of peace, so much in love with the heart of our God that we express all we do in that continuation of relationship, because He wanted that we be beings of peace and therefore unity. Let us pray together that at this Pentecost love will reign, and love will bring peace and mutual understanding. If Russia were converted, they would have their own right, their own rich heritage, but what would it be for the whole mystical body if that massive country recognized the authority of Peter? It's difficult now because they are horrified by some of the abuses in the West. We have to respect the East, but we need them. And this terrible division between East and West also would have been foreseen by the Lord in His high priestly prayer. He did not want it. And the miracle of His light happens in the hands of the Eastern Patriarch, the descendant of St. James, on Holy Saturday. The Lord is calm, does the same thing, and is always faithful. He is patient, but His desire is that be one. That means huge respect for all those who love and believe alongside ourselves, and an avoidance of presumption. We cannot deny our past. We cannot deny the East. We cannot deny the martyrs who would have also been horrified as they lay on the rack and saw what we can see, devastation, handing cheaply on the most precious treasure that we have, the body and blood of Jesus, which demands the maximum possible on earth of respect, otherness and adoration. We have put God in our pocket and used Him for our own ends, and we expect